everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Motivate with Coach Camp. I, of course, am your host, Coach Camp, and you know where we are. We're down here in this amazing, beautiful studio known as SRP with Mr. Derek Michaud. Now, look, I got to tell you something. It is always amazing to me whenever people go way out of their way, carve out parts of their day just to be a part of this program. It means so much to me. And today's guest drove all the way up from Boonville, Mississippi, literally hot, fresh off the presses, straight into the studio from the interstate to be able to do this today. And I am so grateful for it. I know you guys are going to absolutely enjoy and love this episode. So look, let me tell you something. I am going to say with complete confidence that it is no longer a secret. And for the first time in my adult memory, this has taken a front row seat in all areas of society, which is absolutely needed. And that is mental health. I think that it's not a stretch to say that for years and years and years, it was underappreciated, the idea that a person's mental health also leads to their physical health and everything else about that in society. And so whenever I was connected with this lady, I was super excited about the idea of being able to bring her in, talk about a lot of specifics. So today's guest is Miss Rita Finney. She is from the Regional 4 Mental Health Services. She is the prevention coordinator there. We're going to learn all about her, where she came from, how she ended up in this area, and really, I think that at the end of the day, some resources that everybody can learn from. So at this time, thank you, Miss Rita, for coming in. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So straight in off the interstate, how's the blood pressure?
Well, I did take a couple deep breaths before I got out of the van.
I got news for you. For me, it's taking a couple deep breaths before I get on the interstate. I don't know if you've noticed, people drive crazy.
Yeah, they do.
That's probably my biggest weakness. And talking about mental health, I need some when I get on the interstate. It's like road rage times 10 sometimes. So welcome. I'm glad you made it up here safely.
Thank you.
Let's start out with a little bit about who's Miss Rita? Where'd you come from?
All right. Well, I currently live in Boonville, Mississippi. I work at our Region 4 facility there. We have 5 counties, DeSoto being one of them, Alcorn, Tippah, Prentice, and Tishomingo. And I got into this field because as a child, I was born deaf in one ear, so it's called unilateral deafness. And I struggled through school. Nobody knew really how to deal with the type of deafness that I have.
Where'd you grow up at?
In Tupelo, Mississippi.
So you grew up in Tupelo?
Yes.
And so this was something that was unique to the area?
Yes.
Okay.
They originally, by the time I was 12, trying to put me in specific hearing aids that would just transfer the sound from one ear to the other. Because you can't hear direction, you can't hear like mid-tone sounds or anything like that. It didn't work for me. You really have to work on that.
So how old were you when they realized that you had some hearing deficiencies?
I was in the 2nd grade.
Okay.
By the time they realized that I was completely deaf in one ear.
I would say the medical world has come a long ways then.
Absolutely.
I don't get me to saying what they do for eye, ears, nose, and throat stuff, but my understanding is you can pretty much tell at a very, very early age, infancy even.
Yes.
If there are hearing deficits.
Absolutely.
So then they didn't realize this till then, and the treatment was, there was a hearing device that helped you kind of like echo. Is that kind of what you're saying?
No, it was like a transmitter. It would just transfer that sound to the other ear.
Interesting.
Yeah. It didn't work for me because I was too old by the time they got this type of technology.
So it sounds to me then like it almost has to kind of like hardwire your brain to understanding that at an early age.
Yes.
And then you develop that as you get older. That makes a lot of sense to me. I mean, I've studied a lot of psychology, and that is something about that conditioning of the brain. So at the age of 12, when they're finally figuring this out, I'm assuming then that this had taken a toll on you personally, mentally over the years.
Yes.
Yeah.
I have learned over the years more about this type of deafness, but at the time when I was a child, there wasn't a whole lot of treatment for it. The main thing that they said was put her in the front of the class on the right-hand side since her left ear is the only one that works. So struggling through school, that, took a toll on my confidence.
Sure.
And I started reading psychology books as a kid, trying to make the world a better place. I knew from an early age that this is, I wanted to be in the mental health profession and work with, because all these things, like you said, they go together.
Sure.
And so at the age of 12, I started reading psychology books, and lo and behold, I have 3 degrees now. I think for me, that was my way of showing myself that I wasn't as stupid as I thought I was, because I struggled so hard in school.
Yeah.
And that, tremendously helped my self-confidence.
So
too.
I want to hit on that part right there. So what you're mentioning, though, and this is very relevant to everything we're about to go into today, is so clearly you had some intuitiveness about you at the age of 12, which is very mature, that you understood not only was this a problem for you in a broader scope than just you were having trouble hearing, that this was affecting your confidence, which was affecting your personality, which would affect how you approached everything else in life.
Absolutely.
And not only did you recognize that, and this is the part that is really, truly fascinating, but you didn't sit back at the age of 12 and say, I'm a victim. Instead, you said, let me find a solution, because what you realized, whether or not you did realize it at that time, was that you can't be the only person suffering from this.
Right.
And that there has to be something better, and that you were not going to sit idly by. You were going to take action to figure out what could be done that could be better to help others, because you knew that you were not the only person doing that.
Yes.
That is fascinating. Do you realize that looking back now? It's like, man, I was 12 and I figured that out.
When you putting it into those words, I didn't.
Yeah, but that's what was happening, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's funny because at 12, I'm just like, am I going to get the next action figure from Star Wars? That's what I'm thinking about. That is in depth, but that shows that you were in the trenches with something, and you realized that this has to be better than what it is right now. And so when you start taking those steps, how old were you, would you say, when you went into college? Let me ask this. So when you went into college, how old were you when you made that decision that you were going to go down the line of psychology and then mental health in general?
Oh my gosh. Well, I struggled with wanting to go to college for 12 years.
Okay.
So there were other things that I felt like I would be interested in too. Since graduating high school, I've told my students when I teach classes all the time, if I could go to college till the day I die, I would, because there's so many things that I want to learn, and so I went through nursing school.
Oh, wow.
I went.
Did you get your RN?
No, I didn't complete it.
Okay.
I realized when I was doing, I was working in a hospital as a nurse's assistant, and I realized at that time, this isn't for me. And so then I got back on track and got back into sociology and corrections as my minor.
If you don't mind me asking, how old were you at that point when you made that transition?
20.
Okay, still young, very young. Yeah. Okay. Did you have, what were your parents doing at this time? Because that plays big into a lot of people's influences as well. So like, what was their background? Was there any influence there to go towards this direction?
Well, I will say that my father was in the military, and we traveled all the time.
Military brat.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so my mom and dad wound up divorcing when I was like 9 years old. And so my mother was my biggest cheerleader, in whatever I wanted to do. She was just, I could have been a victim because my mom was like, poor thing. She's deaf. What can we do?
Yeah.
But she was still my biggest cheerleader. She didn't try to push me into anything.
Yeah.
But she tried to make me feel as confident as she could.
Sure.
Knowing that I did feel inferior in a lot of ways. I wouldn't tell anybody that I was deaf. I didn't want anybody to know.
Very self-conscious about it, huh?
Yes.
That is, and I guess if you've never experienced something like that, it probably is kind of hard for me to rationalize or wrap my head around why that makes you feel different. But clearly it makes sense when you're talking about it. I guess if I saw somebody as a kid that had trouble hearing, I probably wouldn't think anything of it, but it ain't happening to me. And so that does make a lot of sense. And I like the fact, too, that you point out that your mom was very supportive and a great cheerleader, but you also realize that could have went the other way, because a lot of parents that have a child that has some kind of deficiency, and it doesn't matter what that deficiency is, they find themselves becoming an enabler.
Yes.
And they are trying to do everything they can to soften all the other things that are going to come at their kid, because they realize life is tough anyways. This is just one more obstacle. So where did you find the strength or the influence, realizing that your mom was a nurturer, and there's nothing wrong with that? It's every parent. I would say most parents are going to be that person. I get it. Totally get it. I would be the same way. Where did you find the influence to say, hey, I am going to choose to be a fighter?
My faith.
Okay.
My parents were very strong in their faith when we were growing up. And it was an extremely important influence in my life from the time I was just a tiny child.
Sure.
And so when I do teach classes and I talk to kids about this, I tell them that I overcome all these obstacles and challenges knowing that my faith would help me get through it. Mm. And so I guess that would be the answer to that.
I love that answer. I do love that answer. And if you listen back to a lot of my podcasts, and we've been on now, this is our second season, so many of my guests attribute their ability to overcome these great adversities in life to having a center stone of faith. And a lot of times that does come from the influence, right? So what you're growing up around, those things that are impacting the way you see the world, is ultimately going to be a lot of the core values that a person will take with them. And even if you see a kid stray away from that, if they were brought up the right way, and I say the right way, I'm just talking about with the idea that life is bigger than you, there is a purpose for you being here, and that there is a greater power that is above all of us, then that does help you get back to places whenever you get down deep. And we're about to jump into some of this stuff because I wanted to get some of your backstory and to understand what influenced you to go down the road of mental health. I don't think it's a stretch to say that right now in society, there's been an influx. There's been a rise in mental health emergencies. It goes beyond just somebody being stressed or depressed or having to go through different types of therapies. There has been real mental health breakdown in society. And I think there are a lot of attributing factors to that. One, population. When you grow a population, you're going to have more of whatever something is in the population. The other part of it, too, is so many other exterior forces pushing on you. A big part of that is social media, of course. And then you go beyond that, there's been a breakdown in the family structure. It's been taboo to recognize that you have a faith growing up. So it just depends on where you live, of course, in America, and then, of course, across the world. All of these things compound.
Even your diet.
Yes, everything. Absolutely. I'm glad you mentioned that. Yeah.
I think that, that's something a lot of times that's neglected. Mm-hmm. And having been in mental health for 25 years, I've had the opportunity to continue my education in going to conferences and talking with, professionals in their fields. Mm-hmm. And that was one of the early on things that we had a lot of scientists talking to us, that some of these major venues telling us that, especially here in the South, we're raised on catfish and turnip grease.
Sure, yeah.
Tons of fried food.
Bacon grease in the turnip grease.
Yes.
Yeah, that's the way it's going
all those kinds of things play a huge role in your mental health.
Sure it does.
Also, whether you use alcohol or drugs. Mm-hmm. Those are going to affect your brain chemistry, even short term. A lot of people think about the long term damage, but even early on, it plays a huge role in how your brain functions.
Absolutely. You're bringing up a great point on this, in that there's no one denominator. It's not like take this out and these things get better. There are so many areas, diet, of course, being one of those things. And I can speak to that clearly. Full disclosure. Whenever I come into the studio, I will make sure that I've drank a lot of water over the day, and I have had some version of vegetables or fruits in the morning, and it does create mental clarity. Absolutely. If I've had chips all day long or whatever the case may be, it does clog your thinking.
It does.
And when you come into a studio and you're having a conversation, you don't want to drift. And so you're absolutely right. Exercise being another big part of that.
Absolutely.
The physical exertion, moving the blood through your body, oxygenating the blood, all of these things play into it. So here you are. You have decided to go down the road of mental health. What age were you when you got into taking those types of classes that you saw this was going to be clearly my future? 'Cause you said at 20 you were going into RN, and then at some point you shifted over. What age was that?
Well, that's when I shifted over, is at 20.
Is that 20? Okay.
Yes, I had gone into nursing
Straight out of high school.
pretty much.
Okay. And so you study, what kind of stuff were you studying? What kind of background?
Abnormal psychology, child psychology, and part of my sociology, how societies and environment affect mental health as well. All those kinds of classes.
So many contributing factors.
Yes.
Now, one thing that is always needed to be mentioned is whenever a person has a passion for something, but they also have a connection to that passion, then they are usually going to, there's just such a different air about them. So you spoke early on about what you had to face as a child, and that you wanted to have some kind of say-so as far as like what the future would look like for somebody in your same condition. So clearly that has a strong connection for you. So at what point in your schooling did it all come together and you say, all right, so my past, now I'm understanding more about why I felt the way I felt, and now this is how I'm going to be able to help other people. So when you go in and share those stories with, I'm assuming that you see patients?
I work a lot in the school systems. I do a lot of alcohol and drug, as well as psychology classes for kids, because the premise is that it takes a good mental health in order to resist alcohol and other drugs.
Sure.
Or whatever, and I always say this, whatever challenges and obstacles that you face. So even though I don't have ADD or ADHD or oppositional defiance, we all have some kind of obstacle that we have to overcome.
So surely you use what you had to go through as kind of like that, like, look, this is what I had to go through. I did it. You can too, right? So that obviously plays well. What are the age groups that you taught to mostly?
Generally, we try to start, say, 6th grade through 8th grade, because, and unfortunately, we're having to get younger and younger with the kids before they get started. Because once anybody gets started on something, it's hard to get them to realize that even though you're not seeing a big change yet, how difficult it would be to get off of any of these things.
Sure, absolutely. You don't realize when chemical dependency starts to kick in, until it's really there. And then you're, a lot of times, and I'm not everybody, but a lot of times people go into denial. So then that just exacerbates the issue.
Yes.
So when you really look at, there's the whole idea of drugs and alcohol to fit in. All right. So I get that when you're young, you're trying to fit in with other folks. And then of course those are bad influences. But then there comes that point where that goes from just fitting in to now that is something that you're trying to use to escape.
Yes.
And that part of things is something that obviously I have been around a lot of, being an adult and being a retired firefighter paramedic and having been in the military. Those adult crutches, if you want to call it that, there's a lot of probably terms you could use, but those things suddenly become a substitute for being able to escape all the things that are going on in your life on a daily basis. And that's different for everyone, but it's still going to be so stressful. So you have to put tools in the toolbox. Can you share a little bit of those tools that you may start somebody with?
Well, first of all, the first lessons that I try to do with them is learning how to build your self-esteem.
Okay.
We spend up to 80% of our lives saying negative things in our head all day.
So true.
I mean, to me, that's just devastating. I don't know how we get anything accomplished with that much negativity running around in our brains. But we do. We manage to. And so what I tell them is if we can improve that, even by 1 or 2%, just think what you can accomplish.
Absolutely.
And so I get them trying to start looking at positive messages. I encourage the students to download, any positive message app that they can. I don't want mom and dad mad at us because they're downloading certain apps on their phone. But there's tons of free ones out there that you can use. I have 3 on my phone. I'm constantly, trying to remember more positive processes to the obstacles and challenges that we're facing every day.
Sure. Is Coach Camp one of them? I'm just curious. Should put that in. Throw it in there. Throw it in there. It's fine.
I sure will.
Yeah. They say when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change.
Yes.
And there are so many different examples. I, too, will listen to Motiversity, which is on YouTube. Believe it or not, I wake up, some days I'm actually on the wrong side of the bed and I'm a little grouchy, and my wife will be like, "What's wrong with you today?" I'm like, "I don't know." And so I have to figure that out myself. And it is easy to sink down into some negative thoughts, especially one day to the next, there's going to be new things that pop up and that you have to really focus on, and then you have to mitigate. And so, part of that is positive mind thinking. And it's so easy, like you just said, to always see that glass half empty. And, so a lot of the Motiversity things, it mentions you are going to be a product of your environment. And this is what a lot of speakers, this is not like Coach Camp came up with this, but this is a lot of the philosophies that are out there, and it's so true to form, is that the people you keep is the company that you keep is the person you'll become.
Absolutely.
And so ultimately their mindset, how they approach things, how they see things. I mean, how many times have you right now listening, whether you're in England right now, I know I've got a bunch of listeners over there, you're in Japan, you're in Australia, or you are in Hernando, Mississippi. How many times do you see a task in front of you and all you can see is all the ways you can fail, and you can't see one way that you can succeed? And so what you're saying is confidence.
Yes.
What you're saying is you build that, you start to instill that at an early age.
You have to.
And the ability to be able to say no to something that you feel like you need to say yes to, so that you can have false confidence.
And so we go on to, I love to teach classes on setting goals for yourself, because there's all these different systems in your life that you have to be responsible for. And I tell them as you age, you're going to have to learn how to budget money, your finances, your physical health, make sure you're eating right and exercising. And then your job, that's going to be a component. Your relationships with your spouse and children, your spiritual self, all these things are like a system in your body. Your body has all these systems, and if one part of it is broke down, it's going to affect the other parts.
Yes, it will.
And so it's the same way with our everyday world. And so I try to get them thinking with that in mind and learning to set goals now. And, if you start that as a kid, by the time you're an adult, you're going to have this thing whizzing and a banging.
Sure.
And so that's the second step that we go through. And then I start teaching them a little bit about what the drugs do to the body, whether it be alcohol, tobacco, vaping, marijuana. We start looking at some of those things, because knowledge is power.
Absolutely.
And a lot of times if they haven't started doing these things and their friends haven't influenced them yet, they will, get this information, and they're much likely to make a much better choice if they have this before they start. I
don't mind being very transparent about myself. You're right. Knowledge is power, and it is also a way to awaken yourself. Whenever I got into I've been a paramedic for, going on 25, 30 years. And in the process of that, obviously you learn a lot about the body. And then whenever I started getting kind of more into the biophysical areas and the chemistry of exercise and how that affects your body, and then the fuel that you put inside of it, there was a movie I saw, a documentary called Game Changers. I don't get any royalties. They should think about that. But they showed what eating fatty foods would do to your blood, and proteins in particular, like meats, and it would make it just like thick. And then they showed a person that had been eating fruits, vegetables, beans, getting their protein from different sources, and how clean it was. And then they showed that compared to athletes and how the athletes responded to the diet. And so what you're saying, though, is that when you start to understand that the things you're putting into your body affect not just your physical makeup, but then your mental makeup, which I got to tell you, the mental makeup of that now is after seeing that fat every time I eat a delicious steak, because I do still eat a steak occasionally, but I'm looking at that and I'm thinking to myself, my blood is going to be nasty. So what do? You got to make exceptions sometimes. You have to mitigate the situation by understanding what you're doing, and then do it in smaller doses whenever you're talking about a diet. When you're talking about putting drugs or alcohol or smoking or vaping into your body, getting a visual of what that's physically doing to you, especially at an early age. That could be a complete game changer in itself, right?
Yes, absolutely.
And so that's mental health in itself.
Mm-hmm.
Here's what I just wrote down. When you were mentioning those things, one word came to mind: intentional. You have to be intentional about life. If you're passive about life, then things are going to happen. And a lot of times we're going to choose the path of least resistance.
Yep.
It's going to be the easy path, the lazy path. And then that is what's going to lead to bad habits, which leads to a poor life. So basically, what I'm hearing you say is that the kids having an intentional approach and you're giving them all these tools to be successful.
Yes.
How does that translate from one age group to the next?
Well, I mean, a big change can happen between grade 6 through 7th.
Mm-hmm.
And I do a lot of classes on social skills as well.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the sections that we do deal with is that when you're an adult and you get into a relationship with somebody, they are going to be more than likely the most significant relationship you're going to have as an adult.
Mm-hmm.
And in order to navigate that well, I was talking about you need to make a checklist of the things that you would want in a partner.
Yes.
And
pros and cons.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And if you are looking for these things in someone, then you need to be those things too.
Oh, that's a great point.
And so the teacher...
Practice what you preach, absolutely.
Yeah, she got in on it. She was passionate about what we were talking about. And she looked up a study that said, Harvard had just done a study that said that 99% of the people that we interact with are going to influence every area of our lives.
Mm. I've always said that the friends are the biggest influence. Parents set structure. That's what they are supposed to do. They set structure and they lead by example because that's going to be the template that a kid builds in their mind as to how they should be when they're an adult. But the greatest influence is the other kids that they hang around, their friends that they hang around. Those are going to be the ones that's going to push them in the right direction or the wrong direction. And look, I got to tell you, I got a 14-year-old daughter. Probably, I don't know if you ever watch these things, Maddie, but I got a 14-year-old daughter. And that is one of my greatest concerns because sometimes it's really hard to know what a kid is like when they're not in front of you. You know, you could have kids right in front of you and you just talk to them and they seem, well, these kids seem squared away. But sometimes you don't know. Sometimes I was that kid growing up. I was the one that the other parents were like, I don't know. Camp's kind of enthusiastic, but I don't know. And so I get it. I get that part of it. And it's like, for me, being intentional, making lists, and then ultimately having somebody there that's someone you can check in with. Because I feel like what we're really talking about here, especially discussing mental health, is that there needs to be an early approach to setting some standards for yourself.
Yes. And
you need somebody to mentor you, but you need somebody that you can check in with. Okay. And I want to say this, and I don't know what's going on out there sometimes in the schools. I'm assuming that there are probably resource officers, et cetera, but counselors, school nurses. There does need to be a more concerted effort, in my opinion. And I don't know if it's happening in some schools and maybe not in others, but there needs to be more of a concerted effort to allowing students to have a safe place to come and talk about stresses and problems at an early age where they don't feel like they're being judged. And I'm not saying in any form or fashion that something should be held from a parent. Not at all. Not that at all. But I am saying that they should feel comfortable knowing that if they say something, that they're in a safe place where they're not going to be judged. Because I think you would probably agree to this. So often, I teach college. So often I will have a student finally just have a moment of breakdown. They'll come and sit in my office and they're sharing stuff with me that I can tell has been bottled up for maybe 5, 6, 7 years. And when I ask, have you spoken to anyone about this? Have you talked about this? I would say more often than not, the answer is no. I didn't know how to say something to somebody, but they felt comfortable with me. They knew they could trust me, and they knew they could confide in me without me looking at them in a judgmental way. And so kids need that. And so in the Region 4, how do you guys approach that kind of thing where you're able to balance? You know, there's areas that sometimes parents need to know about. They got to know about certain things because they don't want their kids to hurt themselves. But then there's that ability to confide in you guys and feel comfortable and safe and trust you. So what is going on at Regional 4 that allows that type of environment? Because maybe that's a model that other parts of America could take.
Well, I've worked at Region 4 for 21 years, and I can say that is not considered my role. Mm-hmm. My role is to teach them, give them tools, to educate them on alcohol and drug-related issues. But I know that all the schools are all very familiar with our school counselors and work really well with them about those things. And, if someone is going to are thinking about harming themselves, we have to share that.
Sure, you do.
That's, law.
It is law.
And so, we're not going to lie to them and say, no, we're going to keep this hush hush or anything, because mom and dad do need to know that you're struggling through those things. Yeah. And so I will say we have some great counselors in the schools that are in the trenches working on those things all the time, not just kids with ADD and ADHD. And
that does tend to take the headlines a lot of times, right?
Yeah.
So, and it goes much deeper.
And I also teach some classes on coping with anxiety. We know that kids, especially when they're young, they're experiencing new things all the time. Whereas an adult, you've already been through a lot of things.
Yeah, it's hard to get back to that lens that they have,
And so they're going through a lot of these things for the first time, and they don't know how to deal with those things. And so I try to give them a lot of tools to take with them. I was honored that the school systems, and I also collaborate with Northeast Community College, and they do after-school programs with kids also. I was honored to be asked to try to do some of those things site-wide. I mean, on a Zoom with different schools at the same time, teaching all these kids how to do deep breathing exercises.
There we go. That's kind of what I was getting at too. Is like, what are some of the other things that you guys have in place? And so using different techniques.
Yes.
Because one thing that works for one person is not always going to work for the next. So that makes sense. Yeah.
And so I teach them how to do a type of meditation that's called total body relaxation. So you start with your feet and you work all the way up to your head, relaxing all the muscles in your body. And mental imagery is another one that you can look at beautiful scenery and it will automatically just kind of start calming you down. And so,
they've been doing that on the Zoom, or not Zoom. I'm sorry. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but
that's okay.
Yeah, there's streaming networks, and so when you're watching, it's like your moment of zen, and there's like a bumblebee doing something. So that's interesting. Anyways, my ADD kicked in because I do have some of that. At least that's what I've been told my whole life. So yes, so there are a number of techniques.
Absolutely.
There are a number of techniques, and I think we do have to explore different ways to connect with each kid. Ultimately, there's no magic wand. So it's going to take intuitiveness, and it's going to take connections. And so that's kind of where I was going with the idea that I try to build a relationship with each student. I try to build trust with each student. And so for the school systems in general, and then of course with Region 4 and realizing how that they are kind of connecting with the different schools and how they are able to educate the children on different things. That's the thing that I'm fascinated with, is how do you build those relationships? How do you get a kid to trust you, to be able to share those moments with you and know that it's a safe place and that you're not going to judge them, because, it's hard to know when you're a kid.
Honestly, it's just showing up,
being present.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm in their classroom with them and we're talking about these things, and they'll come up to me and ask me questions sometimes after, their class period has ended, and share things with me, and I'll try to guide them, well, maybe you can do this deep breathing exercise right before you go into that situation to kind of keep calm, and that way you can think more clearly, those kinds of things.
Do you have team members? I mean, like, are there multiple folks that work with you and do what you do as well? Or are you the lone soldier up here on this end?
I'm it.
You're it.
I'm it.
Well, then right now I'm shutting down part of North Mississippi, and I apologize. So you're up here with us. That's good though. But your message is going to be heard and seen all throughout.
Well,
so that's
and
going to be good.
also I belong. I'm on and over a lot of boards in the community, so I get an opportunity to see all the different aspects.
Sure.
And since I can't go to every single school, in 4 counties, I do what I can. I'll do a lot of guest speakings on specific topics too. I just this week, an organization that I'm the president of contacted me and told me that they had sent out little questionnaires to the kids that they were talking to, and their program was about abstinence and sexual avoidance. And that one of the biggest things that the kids told them is that they need more education on drugs. And so
that came from the kids.
Yes.
Wow.
And they were kind of surprised. And honestly, I was kind of surprised too.
Sure.
But we're working together to try to bridge gaps together, because I am in so many counties and I have been to so many different schools. I try to help them get in places maybe they've never got to go, because not every school system is the same. Some are more open to having people come in and do these things for them.
Yeah.
And once they know that they've got people that they can trust and get to know and see their face, then they're much more likely to let you come in and do these different programs that we offer.
Yeah, that's exactly what you have to do. You kind of have to build those relationships and then have that validity, and then all of a sudden word of mouth will start to spread. So, look, we are at the time for a break, so we're going to step away for just a minute. When we come back, I've got a couple of questions. We've got some statistics. We're going to hit on a few other things real quick, and we're going to share just a little bit more time with my friend, Miss Rita. So come right back.
A great opportunity awaits. The Motivate with Coach Camp podcast is now in its 2nd season, and we are excited to say that we have listeners all over the United States and in 19 countries. If you have a company and you're interested in some very affordable advertising while at the same time supporting a great cause, please go to motivatewithcoachcamp.com and fill out that sponsorship page, and we'll get right back to you. You can support the podcast through donations on Venmo at Motivate with Coach Camp. Thank you to all the listeners and guests who have blessed this podcast with their engagement and involvement.
Welcome back, everybody. As you guys know, we've been talking about mental health today, mental health being a big thing that is now on the forefront across America, across really the entire world. And it's something that's needed. And, focus on that. You go back just 120 years, maybe a little longer. If you had a mental disease, some kind of mental health issue, they thought you were just crazy, put you in insane asylums. Then there was torture happening. So the idea of where we were just over a century ago to where we are today is really great, but there's so much more work to do. And the situation's not necessarily going to be getting better unless we take action. And so you have to recognize that. And so I pulled some statistics. As y'all know, if you watch every week, Coach Camp does his best to do some homework. I'm not saying I'm great at it. I just do the best I can. So I pulled these stats, and usually I put a reference on here. Looks like I failed myself on this one. So fail camp. In 2023, the statistics shown off of this site that I pulled was the reported mental illness, which is important to state because how much of it goes unreported? It's like everything. There's a lot of stuff that goes unreported. But of those that were reported, the mental health illness issue was up 45% since 2019. So that's just 4 years. And you see nearly a 0.5% spike off, or 50% spike off of what it was just in 2019. In 2023, and this again is reported, there were over 12 million adults reported that they stated they had serious thoughts of suicide. I want you to think about that. 12 million people. That is the size, maybe not quite the size of Manhattan in New York City. That is a large amount of people feeling like they needed to commit suicide. The overwhelming average of numbers was from 18 to 33 adults. Didn't specify female, male. And then it says basically that the spikes really started to happen, of course, after 2020. So COVID-19 played a big role in this. And then we have social media. That's another big factor. And then the exposure issues, so people being exposed to different types of environments, obviously more congestion, the more news that they see on TV. There's a lot of stuff always going on the news, depending on what news channel you watch. Ultimately, it comes down to this. People, they need hope. I think if you really wanted to center this into one thing that helps a lot of people, in my opinion, with mental help, is hope. And that's why when you mentioned faith in your journey, how that gave you a center focus, because it didn't matter how hard things were coming at you and how off the rails things may have felt. You had something to look back to where you knew there was a centerpiece of hope. And there are all these other factors that we've spoken about over the first half of the show that contribute to the problems. And it's not any one thing usually, it's multiple things.
Absolutely.
All at the same time. And so we need hope. And part of that hope is having somebody in your corner, having somebody that believes in you. And so I wanted to take this opportunity. I've spoken on this, I don't even know, lots of times, but I'm a part of an organization called the Hope Center. And what that whole thing is about is just mentoring children from 3rd, 4th grade up to senior year, because that is some very influential developmental portions of their life. And really all we do, and what you mentioned right before we went to break, was all we really do is we're present. We show up with the kids. We may go roller skating a day, or we may take them to the park and play. And it might be 30 or 40 kids that are with us. And it's myself and, of course, a host of mentors that show up. And it's just somebody that they can see that is a positive light in their life.
Yes.
And they are giving them some structure, and they show them some love, and they realize, hey, look, I know I'm in a bad spot right now in my life. Maybe things have not worked out. Maybe my home life is tough. Maybe my friends have influenced me to go in a bad direction. But right now, here's this person right now in my life. They're present. They're in front of me. They're letting me know that I matter, and I can see a path forward that is better than where I've been. And that is the message.
Yes.
That is the message. And so when I bring you in, Miss Rita, and we're talking about Regional 4 Mental Health Center, which is where you work, that is just a facet of society. But there's so many avenues that we can take that can have an impact, a positive impact on where we're going. Look, I don't like to use myself always as an example, but I'm all I know, right? So I'm in a classroom and I may have 20, 25 students. I don't look at any one of them as less than the next. They're all equally important to me. I tell my students all the time I love them. It may be weird, I don't know, but I'm not making it awkward. I just let them know that somebody cares about them. And we are in a tough world, and what's going on outside of these walls of the school is life. And it comes fast. And you may be struggling. And if you're coming into my classroom and you're having a hard time, I want you to share that with me. I want you to feel comfortable sharing that with me. And so clearly you had an upbringing that allowed you to have that empathy and to have that vision and to have that insight as to what a person might need to be successful in life. And so obviously talking about COVID and talking about all the other social media, all the things that have kind of influenced this, what are some things that you see in the mental health realm that might be changing or growing because of the influx of individuals from the stats that I just gave?
The mental health hotline, or 911, I guess you'd say.
Is it 988?
Yes.
988. Okay, yeah. I remembered saying it.
Just
so 988,
for
yes.
mental health
right.
issues that you can call for an emergency situation with that. That's come after COVID.
Yes.
When you have something like that happen, you see everything go up, whether it is suicide, drug use, mental illness crops up. Certain stressors will trigger, maybe you have an underlying family thing with schizophrenia. A big enough trauma can set that into motion for somebody who's been fine for the most part. But it also goes back to that 80% negative thinking.
Sure.
What we're feeding our brain negatively impacts all the other thoughts that we're having about everything that's going on in our lives and around us.
And that all of a sudden is the only thing that's on a loop.
Yes.
Right? It's hard to find that positive light and that silver lining, so to speak, especially when things seem to compound all the time. And that's where it's so important for people like yourself, giving them tools and recognition of when a problem's coming on.
Yes.
And they're feeling overwhelmed and how to hit reset. And for those of you that are at least over the age of 40, maybe, I played a lot of PlayStation when I was a kid.
Mm-hmm.
And if the game wasn't going well by about 5 minutes in, I just hit the reset button and started over and went back to it. But ultimately what that deal was, and I'm using this as maybe an awkward analogy to it, but it is real, is when I hit the reset button, those few seconds to a few minutes that I had played of the game were kind of becoming ingrained. And so when I went back to it, I was better and I got further. And if I didn't get as far as I'd like, I'd hit reset and come back to it. Well, we can't hit reset on life, but we can hit reset about our thoughts. We can hit reset about how we're receiving information and how we're interpreting it and how we're responding to it. And sometimes you got to have some tools in the toolbox to know how to hit that reset button rather than fixate on it. And that sounds a lot like what you guys are doing. And I don't know what other mental health programs are in this area that would do that, but I know that there are lots of programs that do help individuals in a lot of tough spots. So for you were mentioning at some point in our break, I think, that there's something you've got going on that you wanted
Yes.
to share. So talk to me a little bit about that.
Well, after I get the kids to start looking at positive messages on apps, I tell them that we're going to give them an opportunity to write some of them down that are meaningful to them.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so for each class that I do, we have a winner. So if I have a school that I have 6 classes at, there'll be 6 winners that come from that. And so they'll write positive messages on cards, and then we will get them judged, and they win prizes. Usually it's a $20 gift card to whoever helps sponsor the prizes gets them from.
Yeah.
And so a real sweet lady named Shannon Faust,
Mm-hmm.
she, for the last couple of years, has been instrumental in helping us get donations so that we can, and she oftentimes will buy the cards and send them to me to give to the students. You know, that it can be Subway, it can be Walmart, Amazon, all these different places.
Mm-hmm.
And so the kids really enjoy that. You know, they're kind of surprised when, you know, they're going to win something like that for this. And then once the winners are gotten from all the different schools that I'm doing that year, I put them on signs. Mm. And on the back, it has a QR code that has all the available mental health resources on it.
Oh, wow. Okay, that's nice.
Yes. And then we put those out at area businesses. And so we're trying to give back to the community
Mm-hmm.
and trying to raise more positive-minded thought processes, healthier thought processes to dealing with a lot of the situations that we all face. And so I've only had one person say that they didn't want to sign, and that was only because they were renting the building and they didn't know how the owner would feel about it. So needless to say, I've been doing this for 2.5 years now, this little project called the Positive Message Project.
Mm-hmm.
And all the communities have been really supportive and putting these signs up.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them taking a couple, some of them putting them in, taking some home and putting them in their yard and different things like that. And it teaches the kids to give back to their community.
Yep.
And so, they're seeing the positive results of using positive-minded messages and increasing their positive thoughts. And then we're giving that to the community to see.
Yeah. And I want to just mention Shannon, since you brought her up. Good friend of mine, she came on. She was in one of our earlier episodes about bullying, where she lost her son to suicide because of being bullied. And that's one of those moments where, as a parent, you're really at a fork in the road in life, because it's really hard to find a way to move forward. And I commend her greatly, because she took this tragedy that was in her life and she realized that this kind of pain should not be felt by other parents. And so she's taken that initiative to build what you're talking about, that positive mind thought process. And she's put out signs, bracelets. She's done 5K walks in memory of her son, but also standing up against bullying. And then in the end, being a positive message to children, letting them know they matter. I have 2 of those signs in my yard, Miss Rita.
Do you?
I do. One of them says, let's see, one says you matter, and the other one says don't give up. And yep, she actually was Steve. Her ex-husband gave me that. And, I want to share a story about that, because I think this is relevant right here. Steve, become friends, really close friends with their whole family. I've known Shannon for a long time. And he shared a story with me about the signs that I thought was just amazing. And you don't realize, and I think that this is important, that you don't realize sometimes just the smallest show of love can go a long way with an individual, because you don't know what they're going through and where they're at in life. And just that one moment could be the thing that changes a person's mindset completely. And he had put some signs in his yard. And man, I don't want to mess this story up, but a lady had driven by and saw the sign and then in his yard and turned around and came back. And just so happened Steve was outside, and she had asked him about the signs, and he was telling her about it. And she was in a very depressed state and was considering suicide. And
wow.
Yeah, that changed her trajectory. And you know what? I feel good about feeling that swell of emotion come into me, because I know it matters. I know that what people are doing out there matters whenever they're trying to have an influence on somebody else and help them come out of a dark place. Because one thing I have seen, being a firefighter paramedic for so many years, was that your life can be perfectly put together, and on a dime, things change. So don't ever think that you're above falling into those places. Don't think that. What you do need to realize, though, is that what you do does matter, and that moment that you didn't see is significant. That moment that you shared with one other person could be the thing that changes everything for them. And it's so important.
And I encourage my students and anybody. I know it seems like a simple thing, just looking at a positive message, but research shows if you'll spend 3 minutes a day, it can vastly improve your mental health.
100%. I start out every day at the school with putting a quote on the board for the day. And it's anything and everything in between, but it's always a positive line of talk. So, I've used a lot of Martin Luther King Jr. Obviously, he's a very positive-minded person, went through a lot of stuff. Mother Teresa, Maya Angelou, you name it. I've used a lot of them, but it's true. And you think about each of those people. Do you think that they had it easy?
Absolutely not.
Jackie Robinson. I mean, Jackie Robinson was like, to me, I'm a baseball guy. And it's like, he's like the baseball legend of legends to me. What he had to go through is not something that most of us could comprehend. And so his positive-minded quotes blows me away. It's like, how do you find that? How do you find that in such a tough spot? How do you do that? And it's difficult, but it does come from focus, and it does come from intentionality, and you have to work that way. So I do want to ask about this real quick, but as we get a little closer to the finish line here, we started out the whole conversation talking about the fact that you come in, you talk to people about students, about drugs, alcohol. Obviously, it doesn't take, there's not like a set time. It's like you do it this amount of time and now you're addicted. Addiction can happen at any time for any person.
Yes.
We're all wired differently. Do you guys have affiliations with organizations that cater towards addiction specifically?
Yes, we do have a rehab center called the CDC in Corinth, Mississippi. And so, gosh, that started, I think, a year before I came on board. So for at least 22 years, we've had that facility up and running.
Good. And so whenever you're a patient of them, is there like a time limit, or are they a patient indefinitely? So all we used to have was Parkwood Behavioral Center, and there was always like there's parameters on insurance and stuff. So is that something to be concerned about, or is there an indefinite amount of time that a person could come back and reuse the facility?
You mean like how many tries it takes them?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
No, it just, and of course there's, insurance, there's, Medicare, Medicaid, and
might be a little different depending on who you carry.
Yes.
Yeah. I asked that question because I have a friend, Stacy Dodd, which is the founder of the Hope Center, and he also is a big part of Vertava, which has now changed its name. And please forgive me, Stacy, for not remembering their new name, but they're an addiction help center they cater to veterans, but I don't think you have to be a veteran to be a patient. But they're kind of that way. It's like once you're in the family, you're in the family. And if you need help, we come back to you. And I don't know if you're familiar with Miss Ann Lunsford. She runs an organization that's called Precious and Pink Ministries, which is women that come out of jail that have had addictions and they've had a history of crime and stuff. And she gets them back on their feet. And once they're in her family, they're in her family and they don't let go. And I think that that's another big aspect is having that safety net as such that you feel like, well, I'm back on my feet. But if I fall down, it's over. You need to be encouraged to be able to say, hey, look, we got you back going again. Let's stay the road, but you have me as a resource. And that's so, so important in my opinion.
It is because, some research suggests that it takes 4 to 5 tries before the person can get it right.
It's a great point. That's a great point.
Addiction is an extremely hard thing to overcome. I tell the students I have an addiction to sugar. And if I have a hard time getting off sugar, I can't imagine what it must be like to get off of alcohol or drugs.
No, and me either. I'm fortunate that I never went down that road, but I can see how a person gets consumed by that, especially whenever that's their go-to. And I've had friends, that's been down that road. And
the brain doesn't like change.
It doesn't like change. And there's those chemical receptors that connect to it.
Yes.
And then the cravings are overwhelming. You know what I mean? So, all right, we are near the end here, Miss Rita. Do you have some final thoughts from our listeners? Anything you want to leave them with? And share with them also how they could reach you guys if they are in need of your services.
Well, we do have a website that lists all the different counties and where their offices are and that sort of thing. It has the schools that have specific, that have counselors at them to work with the kids, as well as, the adult services. It's a separate category, and you'll find all that information there. So you just have to go to the Region 4 website. Okay,
so you could probably just type in Regional 4 Mental Health Services into Google, I would imagine, and that pulls up most all the stuff. Is there a phone number there too? I'm assuming all that stuff's all on the website.
It is
obviously.
For each county.
It's an easy yes. All right.
Yes.
So I'm almost rhetorical that I said it. But anyways, that's my mind thinking fast. So what final thoughts would you have from our listeners as we walk out of here on this great episode? And I know this is going to be food for thought for a lot of people out there.
Gosh, there's so much. Again, it seems like a simple thing, but adding positive messages to your thought processes every day, looking at those kinds of things, your brain can do amazing things with that. Just feed it good stuff every day, and you will begin to see your life start to open up and bloom in a positive way.
I'll tell you what, in fact, I'm going to challenge you guys to do this. I know most of you wake up in the morning, there's 2 things you do. You got to go pee, that's me. And then the other part of it is you're going to look at your phone. Every time you're going to look at your phone to see what's going on. Program your phone to where the first thing you see is a positive quote from somebody. And there are plenty of apps out there you can do. Plenty of them. I don't even want to go down the list. There's a lot of them.
Inspirational, spiritual,
yes.
All kinds.
Or a Bible verse, whatever it is for you, whatever that is. I challenge you to fill your brain with the very first thing every single morning with something that gets your day started right. Every single day, because there's a lot to be thankful for. And let's face it, we get along through this world better when we are together. And that is my true feelings. And I say that sincerely from the heart. Well, Miss Rita, I cannot thank you enough for your time and the day. I know you had a long ways to drive. I'm glad you got here safely. Thank you so much for coming and sharing with my listeners. I know they're going to get a lot out of this.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you, listeners. Thank you for always tuning in and sending me comments. Subscribe to the YouTube. Continue to be a part of this mission, because I'll be honest with you. Look, we are going to be stronger together. The more this grows and the more the message gets out, the better life is going to be for a lot of people. So please be a part of that process. This is your opportunity. Thank you for tuning in, and please continue to watch. And until next time, Coach Camp out.
I love the chase and the hunt, and I set the pace when I'm running. I always take what I want, and I always give it 100. Don't need a bank, no, I'm funded. Play the game like it's nothing. I'm always thankful for something. Don't take for granted, stay humble. Now wake up, it's time to look at the enemy. Look in the mirror if he is no friend to me. It's not working out, maybe it's the chemistry. It's time to break up so I can make a better me. Better believe it. shape